dear brethren and friends, first of all, I want to thank God for granting us health, strength, and also the salvation through Jesus Christ our Lord. We thank God also for the Bible, the Holy Scriptures, and for the spirit of prophecy. Let the name of the Lord be praised forever. We want to consider now the history of the beginning and the establishment of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform movement. But before that, I wish to consider a few points in the history of the Advent movement from the very beginning. The Seventh-day Adventists, having a prophetic basis on Daniel 8:14, had their origin in the year 1844, and 16 years later, that is, in 1860, they associated themselves as a church when they adopted their name, Seventh-day Adventists, and covenanted to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Their covenant is recorded in this book called The Story of the Advent Message, written by Matilda Erickson Andros. And I read the pledge that they made. It is found on page 105. We, the undersigned, hereby associate ourselves together as a church, taking the name Seventh-day Adventists, covenanting to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus Christ. Story of the Advent Message, page 105. The following year, on October 6, 1861, they organized themselves as the Michigan Conference, and they renewed the covenant to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, as it is recorded on page 105 of this book. 2 years later, that is, on May 20, 1863, the Seventh-day Adventists organized themselves as a general conference. And the following year, on August 2, 1864, during the Civil War in the United States, the General Conference Committee sent a letter to the governor of Michigan, which we quote hereunder. Now, this, what I'm going to read, is recorded in this book here, Seventh-day Adventists in Time of War, written by Francis McLennan Wilcox. And this Elder Francis Wilcox was a member of the General Conference Committee. And I read from page 58, which I have here a copy of that page 58. And this was written by the committee of the General Conference. And they say, "We, the undersigned Executive Committee of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, respectfully beg leave to present for your consideration the following statements. The denomination of Christians calling themselves Seventh-day Adventists, taking the Bible as their rule of faith and practice, are unanimous in their views that its teachings are contrary to the spirit and practice of war. Hence, they have ever been conscientiously opposed to bearing arms. If there is any portion of the Bible which we as a people point to more than other as our creed, it is the law of the Ten Commandments, which we regard as the supreme law, and each precept of which we take in its most obvious and literal import. The fourth of these commandments requires cessation from labor on the seventh day of the week. The sixth prohibits the taking of life, neither of which, in our view, could be observed while doing military duty. Our practice has uniformly been consistent with these principles. Hence, our people have not felt free to enlist in the service. In none of our denominational publications have we advocated or encouraged the practice of bearing arms, and when drafted, rather than violate our principles, we have been content to pay and assist each other in paying the 300 commutation money. And while that provision remained of universal application, we did not deem any public expression of our sentiments on these questions called for. We would further represent that Seventh-day Adventists are rigidly anti-slavery, loyal to the government, and in sympathy with it against the rebellion. But not having had a long existence as a distinct people, and our organization having but recently been perfected, our sentiments are not yet extensively known. The change in the law renders it necessary that we take a more public stand in the matter. For this reason, we now lay before Your Excellency the sentiments of the Seventh-day Adventists as a body relative to bearing arms, trusting that you will feel no hesitation in endorsing our claims that, as a people, we come under the intent of the late action of Congress concerning those who are conscientiously opposed to bearing arms and are entitled to the benefits of said laws. Signed, John Byington, J. N. Loughborough, Geo W. Amadon, General Conference Executive Committee of Seventh-day Adventists, published in Seventh-day Adventists in Time of War, page 58. Now, at the third annual session of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists on May 17, 1865, the following resolution was made. And here I have the copy of these 2 pages of Seventh-day Adventist in Time of War, pages 23 and 24. And they say, and I read, "Resolved that we acknowledge the pamphlet entitled The Extract for the Publications of Seventh-day Adventists, setting forth views of the sinfulness of war as a truthful representation of the views held by us from the beginning of our existence as a people relative to bearing arms. Resolved that we recognize civil governments as ordained of God, that order, justice, and quiet may be maintained in the land, and that the people of God may lead quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and honesty. In accordance with this fact, we acknowledge the justice of rendering tribute, custom, honor, and reverence to the civil power as enjoined in the New Testament. While we thus cheerfully render to Caesar the things which the Scriptures show to be his, we are compelled to decline all participation in acts of war and bloodshed as being inconsistent with the duties enjoined upon us by our Divine Master toward our enemies and toward all mankind. Resolved that this conference requests the Executive Committee of the General Conference to prepare an article for publication setting forth our view of the teaching of the Scriptures on the subject of war. Quoted in Seventh-day Adventist in Time of War, pages 23 and 24. In the year 1867, the General Conference session made the following resolution, and I have here a copy of Review and Herald where that resolution is mentioned. It says, resolved that it is the judgment of this conference that the bearing of arms or engaging in war is a direct violation of the teachings of our Savior and of the spirit and letter of the law of God. Yet we deem our duty to yield respect to civil rulers and obedience to all such laws as do not conflict with the Word of God. In carrying out this principle, we render tribute, customs, reverence, etc. Review and Herald, May 28, 1867. During that time, from the year 1861 to 1865, was a civil war in the United States. And Ellen White received the instruction from the Lord regarding the military service and taking part in war. And she wrote, and what I am going to quote is recorded in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, pages 361 and 362. I read, I was shown that God's people, who are his peculiar treasure, cannot engage in this perplexing war, for it is opposed to every principle of their faith. In the army, they cannot obey the truth and at the same time obey the requirements of their officers. There would be a continual violation of conscience. Worldly men are governed by worldly principles. They can appreciate no other. Worldly policy and public opinion comprise the principle of action that governs them and leads them to practice the form of right doing. But God's people cannot be governed by these motives. The words and commands of God, written in the soul, are spirit and life, and there is power in them to bring into subjection and enforce obedience. The 10 precepts of Jehovah are the foundation of all righteous and good laws. Those who love God's commandments will conform to every good law of the land. But if the requirements of the rulers are such as conflict with the laws of God, the only question to be settled is, shall we obey God or man? Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, pages 361 and 362. As we can see, it was clearly stated not only by the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but also by the spirit of prophecy, that taking part in war is a transgression of every principle. It is opposed to every principles of the faith. Now, there were, although, some who decided to enter in the war. And what happened to them? I have here a photocopy of a book called Light Bearers to the Remnant. This was written by Elder R.W. Schwartz, prepared by the Department of Education of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. And on page 101 of this book, it reads, during the final tense months of the war, several Adventist soldiers who enlisted voluntarily found themselves deprived of church membership. One of these men had been a member of the headquarters church in Battle Creek. Notice of their dismissal was boldly published in the Review. Light Bearers to the Remnant, page 101. As we can see, those who enlisted voluntarily, they lost their membership. And it says that one of them was even published in the Review. And I have here a copy of the Review and Herald where his name is mentioned, and I'm going to read it. Review and Herald, March 7, 1865. It says, as voluntary enlistment into the service of war is contrary to the principles of faith and practice of Seventh-day Adventists, as contained in the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, they cannot retain those within their communion who so enlist. Enoch Hayes was therefore excluded from the membership of the Battle Creek Church by a unanimous vote of the church, March 4, 1865. The Review and Herald, March 7, 1865. Now, in the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 10, which is this here, this Volume 10 is the encyclopedia. Under the title SDA Reform Movement, German, 1915, the following is statement about the Reform Movement, and I read, though the original issue was over visions and time setting, the bone of contention through the years has been the stand taken by the SDA Church concerning the duty of its members in military service. SDA Bible Commentary, Volume 10, page 1183, which is the encyclopedia. It is true that the bone of contention has been and still is the question of military service and taking part in war. But It is not true that the origin of the Reform movement was over visions and time setting. In the same book, they say, on same page, one man, Joe Vick, drafted into the army, German army, proved to be an extremist, claiming to have been shown in vision that probation for all men would end that spring. Several other persons also made time-setting prediction. These alleged prophets denounced the SDA leaders for not giving credence to their predictions and for refusing to publish them. Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 10, page 1183, edition of 1976, because in other editions the page is different. The only name mentioned in the encyclopedia in this article is Joe Vick. Joe is abbreviation of Johann in German, Johann Vick. It was mentioned that there were also other persons who set times, but their names are not mentioned. The name of Johann Vick, who claimed to have visions, is used in the Bible commentary as being the founder of the Reform movement. Honestly, for the sake of truth, we must say that he was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, not of the Reform movement. Let us quote the words of Elder Arthur Grosvenor Daniels, President of the General Conference, what he declared in Friedensau in 1920. And I read his declaration. A.G. Daniels says, "These here are the documents which have been handed to us by Brother Conradi. They are to show how matters stand with this movement. We can pick out those which you do not consider belonging to your movement. The first writing is by Vick, Protocol, page 23. This book is Protocol, which soon I am going to explain what is this protocol. A. Derschler answered, he did not belong to this movement. I have had the privilege of being with this movement from the beginning." Now, this booklet, protocol, is a complete report, word by word, of the meetings that 4 members of the General Conference Committee held with the representatives of the 2% who had been disfellowshipped from the church. And this was in 1920. Everything that was spoken in those meetings was stenographed, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church published the tract in German under the name Protocol. They translated it into the English language, but they never published it. They kept it in their archives. I have here a little copy of the archives where they kept this protocol. But the Reform movement translated it into Spanish, into Portuguese, and into English. And the page which I indicated, page 23, is from the English version. No, Johann Vick never belonged to the Reform movement. neither before nor after the General Conference that was organized in 1925. However, his name is used to downgrade the Reform movement. Even if Johann Wick would be one of the pioneers, he was not. But even if he and others would apostatize, it would not be fair to charge the Reform movement because the apostasy of some. Our church is not based on the feelings of men, neither on dreams, nor in false visions, but it is based on the eternal truth of the Word of God. In the year 1912, the Seventh-day Adventist published a Sabbath school lesson about the Ten Commandments. They were very, very zealous in preaching the Ten Commandments, the law of God. And they forgot to preach Jesus and his righteousness. The servant of the Lord, Ellen White, wrote about the attitude of some in the following words, and I read from the Review and Herald, March 11, 1890. And she says, "You will meet with those who will say, 'You are too much excited over this matter. You are too much in earnest. You should not be reaching for the righteousness of Christ and making so much of that. You should preach the law.' As a people, we have preached the law until we are as dry as the hills of Gilboa that had neither dew nor rain. We must preach Christ in the law, and there will be sap and nourishment in the preaching that will be as food to the famishing flock of God." The Review and Herald, March 11, 1890. We see that the Seventh-day Adventists, they were very, very zealous in preaching the Ten Commandments, preaching the law. And the servant of the Lord says that we preached so much that we became dry as the hills of Gilboa. In this very point where they were so zealous, so earnest, God put the church to a test. And the spirit of prophecy warned the church about this. And in 1913, the servant of the Lord sent a message to the General Conference, which is recorded in Selected Messages, Book 2, 403. And I read her message. "We are to raise the banner on which is inscribed the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Obedience to God's law is the great issue. Let it not be put out of sight. We must strive to arouse church members and those who make no profession to see and obey the claims of the law of heaven. We are to magnify this law and make it honorable." Selected Messages, Book 2, page 403. The next year, that is in 1914, on July 28, began World War I. The leaders of Seventh-day Adventist Church in Europe took a stand concerning the war question that was contrary to the historic position officially maintained by the Church. They requested the youth of military age to take active part in war. This is what they published in their encyclopedia. And I read on the same page 1183 of volume 10. And I read, on German mobilization in August 1914, the SDAs of that country, faced with the necessity of making an immediate decision concerning their duty to God and country when called into the armed forces. After counseling with the few SDA leaders locally available at that time, the president of East German Union Conference informed the German War Ministry in writing, dated August 4, 1914, that conscripted SDAs would bear arms as combatants and would render service on the Sabbath in defense of their country. Most of the members, when drafted, acted accordingly, though many of them requested and were given assignments in non-combatant service in the Medical Corps or Red Cross units. Many declared themselves conscientious objectors and in some cases suffered severe treatment for having done so. Bible Commentary, Volume 10, page 1183, 1976 edition. As we have seen here, it says clearly that the leaders of Germany sent a letter dated August 4, and that was just a few days after the war broke out, only 5 days after, that conscripted as they would bear arms as combatants and render service on the Sabbath and in defense of their country. And they say that they had to make a decision. No, they did not need to make any decision concerning the war question, because the position of the denomination had been firmly established from the very beginning, and that was no participation in war service. On that same page of the encyclopedia, they say, admittedly, the three SDA leaders in Germany took a stand concerning the duty of SDAs in military service that was contrary to the historic stand officially maintained by the denomination ever since the American Civil War, 1861 to 65. Here they admit that the leaders in Germany took a stand which was contrary to the historical stand. But they say further, they took the stand on their own responsibility in a time of emergency, sincerely thinking that they were doing what was the best under the circumstances. But it has never been approved or endorsed by any other committee or council of the SDA Church. The encyclopedia says that the position taken by these three leaders in Germany, which was contrary to the historical stand officially maintained by the denomination, was never been approved or endorsed by any other committee or council of the SDA Church. Let us quote a few statements from General Conference officers to see if this is so. I have here a letter from Elder Christian, and he wrote this letter to Professor M.E. Kern. Now, both of them were members of the General Conference Committee. And on the first page of his letter, I read, "The General Conference Committee considered this matter at the November 1915 Council, stating that it was giving the various countries in the world to continue to adapt themselves to those particular laws." And on the next page of the letter, he says, "In the matter of military service and the bearing of arms, we, the delegates of the Upper Rhineland Conference, are in complete accord with the biblical viewpoint as held by our leaders. We consider this a civil matter, which God established governments have the right to request, as stated in 1 Peter 2, 13 and 14, and Romans 13, 4 and 5. The General Conference Committee also takes the same position. Upon inquiry by the leading brethren from our country, the General Conference Committee at the November 1915 Fall Council stated that it gave complete freedom to the various countries of the world to adapt themselves to those particular civil laws in the future as in the past." Letter of L.H. Christian to Professor M.E. Kern, April 24, 1934. Now, what he says here, Elder Christian says, it is confirmed by Elder Arthur G. Daniels. He says, and I quote from Protocol, page 30, "As soon as the war began in Europe, we studied this subject carefully in America. During the time of war, in the very beginning of the war, the General Conference sent to Europe Elder William Spicer, the Secretary of the General Conference, to take knowledge of the situation there. The result of that visit was that the General Conference became possessed of first-hand information about the events taking place in Europe. And as Elder Daniel says, we studied this subject carefully in America. And what was the result of their study? On page 31 of Protocol, I read, "We took the attitude that everyone should act in this matter according to his conscience." This is the decision that they made. This is the attitude that they took. And further, on the same page and page 32, Elder Daniel says, "Then we had some brethren who had the spirit of love for their country, and they went to the front and fought. They came to England and France and went into the trenches, and I do not know what they did when they were there, but they served and returned when the armistice came. What now was our position toward our brethren with their various attitudes? We have stated that we do not want to become conscience for other people. We declared our position as non-combatants. We are not concerned with going to war. We regret the war and are opposed to it. But we must allow every citizen to take his position toward the government according to his own conscience. Not one of these people has been disfellowshipped from our denomination. Not one of them has been treated as if he were not a Christian. Our brethren have maintained the spirit of liberty, the spirit of love and forbearance and mercy. Protocol, pages 31 and 32. It is important to notice that those who went to England and France and went into the trenches and went to the front and fought, when they returned after the war, they continued as bona fide members of the church. Not one of these people has been disfellowshipped from the church. But who were disfellowshipped from the church in 1914 to 18? Those who remained faithful to the law of God. They were expelled from the church, as we will see soon. The Romanian Seventh-day Adventist leaders also declared that the General Conference Committee in 1915 decided to grant liberty of conscience to act in time of war. They declared, and I quote from a missionary circular letter, pages 35 to 37, I quote two short paragraphs. We, the Conference of the Romanian Seventh-day Adventist Church, tell you that the point of view taken from the Bible is that military service and the call to take up arms is a necessity of the state, to which the authority of God is justifiably given according to the words of 1 Peter 2:13, 14 and Romans 13, 4 and 5. The same view is taken by the General Conference Committee expressed at the session of November 1915 concerning the different countries of the world. They all have the right to conform to the decision of this conference, which is in accordance with that of the Romanian Seventh-day Adventist Conference. Missionary Circular of 1916, pages 35-37. One question: how does God consider freedom of conscience to transgress His law? Let us read from the pen of inspiration a few statements. And I read from the book Patriarchs and Prophets, page 634. God has given men no liberty to depart from His requirements. The Lord had declared to Israel, "Ye shall not do every man whatsoever is right in his own eyes, but ye shall observe and hear all these words which I command thee." Deuteronomy 12:8 and 28. In deciding upon any course of action, we are not to ask whether we can see that harm will result from it, but whether it is in keeping with the will of God. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Proverbs 14:12. Another statement is taken from Thoughts from the Mount of Blessings, pages 51 and 52. Were men free to depart from the Lord's requirements and to set up a standard of duty for themselves, there would be a variety of standards to suit different minds, and the government would be taken out of the Lord's hands. The will of man would be made supreme, and the high and holy will of God, His purpose of love toward His creatures, would be dishonored, disrespected. Whenever men choose their own way, they place themselves in a controversy with God. They will have no place in the kingdom of heaven, for they are at war with the very principle of heaven. In disregarding the will of God, they are placing themselves on the side of Satan, the enemy of God and man. Thoughts from the Mount of Blessings, pages 51 and 52. On August 2, 1914, only 5 days after the beginning of the war, the Secretary of the European Division issued a circular letter. And that circular letter is here in German. And I read what he declared, Secretary of the European Division. Hamburg, August 2nd, 1914. To our dear brethren and sisters, greetings with Psalm 23. In this earnest and terrible time into which Europe has fallen, we desire to request the following of you. Number 1. As followers of Christ through the power of God, we should in these days be true, obedient, and subject to the services of our land. 1 Peter 2:13, 14, and 17. Point 2. We should do our military duties joyfully whilst we are in service or being called to service, so that the officers in charge will find in us valiant and true soldiers who are ready to die for their homes, for our army and our fatherland. Our destiny is in God's hand. Should we lose our life whilst in conflict, let us remember that our life is hid with Christ in God. Colossians 3:8. Point 3. Those who are left at home should prove to their neighbors that they are noble-minded and filled with the love of Christ, ready to help in every way possible to relieve the suffering, the sick, the wounded, the poor, the widows, and the orphans. We dare not lose our courage, but be patient in affliction, doing as Moses, whose song we expect to sing someday. Trust in Him as seeing Him who is invisible. Hebrews 11:27. Let us not forget to earnestly search the Word of God. John 5:39. Visit our meetings regularly, and above all things, when you come before the throne of grace, do not forget to pray for our government and our army. 1 Timothy 2:2. Point 4. We must always remember our mission as messengers of Christ, and, according to our strength, serve to save souls. Committing you all to the grace of God, I am, with heartfelt salutation, your brother in the Lord. Signed, Elder G. Dale, Secretary of European Division. 2 days after this letter of the Secretary of the Division, just 1 week after the beginning of the war, the President of the German Union, H.F. Schubert, sent a letter to the Ministry of War with the following words, and I have here a copy of his letter to the Ministry of War. And I read, Charlottenburg, August 4, 1914. Most Honorable Lord General and Minister of War, since oft times our point of view concerning our duty toward the government, also our position in general military duty, and especially since our refusal to serve in time of peace on Saturday, Sabbath, is regarded as fanatical, therefore I take the liberty, Your Excellency, to present to you in the following the principles of the German Seventh-day Adventists, especially just now in the present war situation. While we stand on the foundation of the Holy Scriptures, we seek to fulfill the precept of the Christendom, keeping the rest day, Saturday, that God established in the beginning, by endeavoring to put aside all work on that day. Still, in times of stress, we have bound ourselves together in defense of the fatherland, and under these circumstances, we will also bear arms on Saturday, Sabbath. On this point, we take our stand on the scriptures found in 1 Peter 2, 13, 17. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of men for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors and unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers. Fear God, honor the king. We have given these resolutions to our members, also asking them to organize prayer meetings to petition God to give the victory to the German arms. Should some among the drafted Adventists refuse to serve on the Sabbath, or object to the bearing arms, we will be grateful, Your Excellency, if the then commanding officer has a knowledge of our principles or resolution. In connection herewith, allow me, Your Excellency, to inform you that in Friedensau, Matchburg, our sanitarium, our mission school, also 250 pitched tents with a physician in charge and a number of trained nurses who will be able to care for about 1,400 wounded soldiers will be placed at your disposal. With prayers that God will give this righteous cause the victory, I have the honor, Your Excellency, to remain. Signed, H.F. Schubert, President of German Union. The president of the European Division and the president of East European Union and the president of Saxon Association declared in a letter to the commander of the army on March 5, 1915, the following. And I have here a copy of the letter that they sent to the commander of the army. Dresden, March 5th, 1915. To the General Commander of the 7th Army Corps in Dresden, relative to number 856, 3rd of February 22nd, 1915, which forbade Adventist meetings to be held in Dresden, allow the undersigned to give the following explanation. For several years, the undersigned clearly set forth before the military officer, both orally and in writing, that military service on Sabbath, Saturday, in times of peace, always remained a question of individual conscience. But at the outbreak of war, the leaders of the Adventist organization in Germany, of their own accord, advised all their military members in all the land under the pressing circumstances and need of the fatherland to do those duties required of them as citizens according to the Scripture, and earnestly to do on Saturday, Sabbath, as other warriors do on Sunday. As proof, allow this enclosed copy of the document to serve the high-esteemed Prussian Minister of War, written on the 4th day of August 1914. This position, already taken years ago, is supported by the attached signatures. For the European Division headquarters at Hamburg, signed L. R. Conradi, the President. For the East German Union headquarters at Berlin, signed H. F. Schubert, President. For the Saxon Association headquarters, signed Peter Drinhaus, President. I want to open here a parenthesis. My father was born toward the end of the 19th century, that is, in 1893. When he was 19 years old, in 1912, he accepted the Advent faith in Hungary and was baptized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church on February 13, 1913. In 1914, he received the circular letter issued by the Secretary of the European Division requesting that all young men in military age should enroll in the service of war. He learned from the Sabbath school lesson in 1912 the importance of keeping the commandment of God. Now, he found himself in a dilemma. Should he enter the war service or not? He desired to be loyal to the church, and so, being a member of Seventh-day Adventist Church, he decided to enter the war service. On many occasions, he told us that his work in the army was to carry the food from the kitchen to the soldiers in the trenches. He became physically sick, and the officer sent him back home for treatment. While he was being treated, the church elder convinced him that an Adventist should not take part in war. He accepted the advice of the elder and did not return to the army. For that reason, he was disfellowshipped from the church. Here I have a picture of my family. This is my father, my mother, this is me, my two brothers. In 1916, in a church where my grandmother, my auntie, and my mother used to meet, the elder of the church by name Kutashi was teaching that the Adventists should not take part in war service. A minister by name Murbach visited that church to perform the communion service, the Lord's Supper. The table was set and everything was ready for the solemnity of the rite. It was the first time that my mother would partake of the Lord's Supper after her baptism. Pastor Murbach asked the congregation, "Who is on the side of Brother Kutashi?" He stood up and said, "It is not on my side, but on the side of the Lord." But the minister insisted, "Who has the same opinion of Brother Kutashi regarding his duties with the government? Please stand up." About 20 people stood up. Then the minister said, "You cannot take part in the Lord's Supper." Then they walked out of the church and met in the backyard, and the rest of the members which stayed inside continued with the ceremony. Brother Kutashi invited these who were with him to his own house, and there they continued their meeting. In that very day, they were disfellowshipped from the church. One of my mother's friends lived until the year 2002. Her name was Rosa Konz Lambru. In 1995, I visited her in Romania, and here is a picture of her with me. And I took a photo, and she was very clear in her mind, with the age of 94. She told me how she and my mother were good friends, and both of them were disfellowshipped from the church together with the others on that same Sabbath. Now, this experience happened in Hungary, not in Germany. Faithful members of the church who decided to obey God were disfellowshipped from the church in other countries of Europe as well. 2% of the members in 16 countries in Europe had the same experience. They were disfellowshipped from the church. I have here a list of the names of the countries where they were disfellowshipped. And I'll read: Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Estonia, France, Great Britain, Holland, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Russia, Sweden, Switzerland, and Yugoslavia. Now, in 1915, a newspaper gave a public but correct testimony about the disfellowshipment of the faithful members. And I have here a photocopy of that German paper called Kölnische Zeitung. That means the newspaper from Cologne. And the newspaper declared, since the beginning of the war, there has been a division among the Adventist people. During the duration of the war, the majority wanted to see the fundamental teachings set aside by force if necessary. The others asked that the sanctification of Saturday, Sabbath, be allowed them even in these times of stress. The opposing faction finally brought about the disfellowshipment from the organization of the followers of the original principles of their faith. Kölnische Zeitung, September 21, 1915, the evening edition. When the war was over, in 1918, the Seventh-day Adventist officers declared through a newspaper that 2% of the members were disfellowshipped during the war. Here is what they published, and I have here a photocopy of the German newspaper where that which I am going to read is recorded. At the beginning of war, our organization divided into two parts. Whilst 98% of our members stepped out after searching the Bible on the ground that it was our conscientious duty to defend the fatherland with weapons, and that also on the Sabbath, and this decided position from the United leaders was at once forwarded to the War Department. 2%, however, did not submit themselves to this decision of the leaders and therefore had to be disfellowshipped because of their anti-Christian conduct. These unprofitable elements set themselves up as preachers and with little result sought to make converts to their propaganda of foolish ideas. They call themselves falsely preachers and Adventists. They are not. They are deceivers. When such elements receive their merited punishment, we regard it, in fact, a favor done to us. Our leaders have, up to this day, allowed our surplus church money to be used up in war loans in the fullest assurance that Germany, with God's help, would come through this terrible struggle victorious. Everywhere our members are sharing the self-evident duty in giving into the hands of the fatherland the so much needed means. The Adventist men are practically all in the field or army service and are awaiting a just treatment and also the thanks of the fatherland. Dresden Neueste Nachrichten, that is the newest news from Dresden, April 12, 1918. And this is the newspaper here. And there is another declaration made by the Seventh-day Adventist Church also through the newspaper. And this time is through the Stuttgarter Neues Tageblatt. That means the newest daily paper of Stuttgart. And this is what they say. In the beginning of the war, there were some members, as there are also in other places, who did not want to take part in war service, either because of their lack of unity or because of fanaticism. they started to spread around their ideas in the congregation by word and by writing, trying to convince others to do the same. They were exhorted, warned by the church, but because of their obstinacy, they had to be put out, for they became a threatening to internal and external peace. Stuttgarter Neues Tagblatt, September 26, 1918. Elder C.H. Watson, who was the General Conference President from 1930 to 1936, declared in his circular letter the European situation in paragraphs 8 to 13 about the disfellowshipment of faithful Adventists. And this is his circular letter, the European situation. It's a copy, but it was notarized, as you can see, the notary. And I read what Elder Watson declared. Point 8. There was in Germany and those other countries concerned a minority of our believers who refused to follow the leadership of Conradi and others into combatant participation in the war. Point 9. These were subjected to much suffering at the hand of their government because of their stand. Point 10. In Germany, those who so took their stand against Conradi's wicked action, and thus committing them to war, were treated with great harshness by Conradi and his associates. The resistance of the minority to military service threatened to compromise the whole body of Adventists in the eyes of the German government. And to avoid this, Conradi had the minority disfellowshipped from the church. Point 11. Thus, the non-combatant minority was forced out of the church in the country, and this separation continued throughout the war years. Point 12. When this state of affairs became known to the General Conference leaders, it created deep concern in their hearts and led to sending W.A. Spicer to Germany at a time when the German submarine peril was extremely grave. Brother Spicer took his life in his hand in order to get first-hand information on that situation. Point 13. The result of that visit was that the General Conference became possessed of first-hand information regarding A. the wrong done to those minority believers, and B. the division and strife which had resulted among our German members. C. the development of bitterness in both groups and especially in those wronged by Conradi. And D. the extreme views to which these groups were driving each other in their differences. As you can see, even the General Conference President from 1930 to 36, Elder Watson declared that Conradi disfellowshipped the minority. It is not only the Adventist Church that recognized that the faithful were disfellowshipped. I have here a photocopy of a Catholic paper called Paulinus in German language, and the Catholic Church knows that in 1914, 2% were disfellowshipped, a minority, 2%. And I read, in 1914, 2% of the members were disfellowshipped from the German Seventh-day Adventist Church because they declared that participation in war service and that on the Sabbath, Saturday, cannot be reconciled with Adventist doctrine. The disfellowshipped believers have considered themselves as the true keepers and defenders of Adventism. Paulinus, March 8, 1953. Also, the Wikipedia made a statement which I'm going to read. And this is a photocopy taken from Wikipedia. It says, the Seventh-day Adventist Reform movement came about as a result of the actions of L.R. Conradi and certain European church leaders during the war, who decided that it was acceptable for Adventists to take part in war, which was in clear opposition to the historical position of the church that had always upheld the non-combative position. Since the American Civil War, Adventists were known as non-combatants and had done work in hospitals and given medical care rather than combat roles. The Seventh-day Adventist leaders in Europe, when the war began, determined on their own that it was permissible for Adventists to bear arms and serve in the military and other changes which went against traditional Adventist belief. Taken from Wikipedia. As you notice here, the Reform movement came to existence as a result of Conradi's action, not because of visions and setting of dates. Elder Conradi had a conviction about taking part in war much before World War I. In the year 1886, he sent a letter, which I have the copy of his letter published in the Review and Herald, October 12, 1886. And he says, after a long struggle, the Baptists are tolerated and their preachers have full liberty to preach. They had to admit the bearing of arms, and we shall have to do the same if we are ever tolerated here. The Review and Herald, October 12, 1886. The leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Europe tried to justify themselves for the position that they have taken. They published different articles giving explanations to justify that apostasy. One lay member in Berlin published a tract under the title Der Christ und der Krieg, that means the Christian and the war. And I have a photocopy here of the first page of that tract. Although it was published by a lay member, it was endorsed by the leaders because three leaders of them prepared the preface. And on page 18 of this tract, it reads, in all that we have said, we have shown that the Bible teaches Firstly, that taking part in war is not a transgression of the sixth commandment. Secondly, that war service on the Sabbath is not a transgression of the fourth commandment. He who believes otherwise, let him show one declaration of the Scriptures or the testimony. If he is not able to do so, let him be careful that he should not bring accusations and statements which he cannot prove. Der Christen, der Krieg, the Christian and the war, page 18. Let us compare this statement with the statement made by the General Conference Committee members on August 2, 1864. And that declaration which we have read, I want to repeat what they declared. They declared, the fourth of these commandments requires cessation from labor on the seventh day of the week. The sixth prohibits the taking of life, neither of which, in our view, could be observed while doing military duty. Now, these two statements of 1864 and the statement of 1915 by Elder Vinson, who wrote this booklet, The Christian and the War, do not agree. They oppose each other. In reality, there was a radical change in the position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, those faithful brethren who were disfellowshipped did not have an intention to start a new church or a new movement. They did not have an organization on a worldwide level, but they had local organization of groups and churches which developed during the 4 years of war. And what was the name that they used? Well, in different countries they use different names. In Germany, for example, they used the name International Missionary Society of Seventh-day Adventists, standing on the old platform of 1844. This is what they declare here in their articles of incorporation, which they were registered in 1919. So in Germany, they use this name, International Missionary Society, Seventh-day Adventists, standing on the old platform of 1844. The words Reform movement was not yet used. In Hungary, the Seventh-day Adventists remaining on the old platform of 1844. I have here a photocopy of the Hungarian paper with that name, which is marked here. In Transylvania, the Adventists of the Old Faith. In Romania and Bulgaria, the Adventists on the basis of the faith of 1844. In Yugoslavia, the remnant Adventists. In Czechoslovakia, the seed of the woman. In Scandinavia, the Adventists of the original faith. Now, much effort had been made for a reconciliation if the church would repent and turn back to the original position regarding the war question. A special effort was made in 1920 when 4 officers of the General Conference visited Europe. And these 4 officers were Arthur Grosvenor Daniels was the president. L.A. Christian, the one that wrote that circular letter I showed you. F.M. Wilcox, the writer of this book in Seventh-day Adventist in Time of War. And M.E. Kern, to whom Christian sent the letter. These 4 members of the General Conference were present, and from their side, the side of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there were present 51 members. And from the side of 2%, there were 16 members. I have here a photocopy of those that met together in 1920 for a discussion, and the representative of 2% put to the officers of the General Conference 4 questions. And those 4 questions are found here in the protocol on page 10. Question 1. What position does the General Conference take concerning the decision which was made by the German leaders since 1914 in regard to the 4th and 6th commandments? Point 2. What proof can be shown us that we have not taken the biblical course toward the brethren? Point 3. What position does the General Conference of the American Brethren take toward the testimonies of Sister White today? Firstly, are they inspired by God or not? Point 4. Is our message according to Revelation 14, 6-12, national or international? Well, after a few days of discussions, especially on point number 1 about taking part in war, Elder Daniels gave the final verdict in the following words, and this is also found in the protocol on page 46. I read what Elder Daniels declared. We believe that you are completely in error in the views which you represent. We believe in the 4th commandment just as much as we have always done, but we are not in the position to agree with your interpretation of it. What would you have said about Moses if, after the law had been given from Sinai, he had commanded you a few days later to kill the king of Bashan and all the men and women and children? Would you have accused him of murder? But God commanded him to transgress the 6th commandment. You see that there are many things to be found in the interpretation of the commandments, and we must have liberty to read and understand the commandments, and not to be bound to the way some small body may interpret them. Protocol, page 46. The representatives of the 2%, they were not satisfied with the verdict of Elder Daniels. They contacted the brethren in other countries of Europe, and they held an international meeting in Würzburg, Germany, in November 18, 1921. And here is a photocopy of those that attended in that meeting. In that meeting, they elected an international committee made up of the following brethren. And I read the names. I have here the list of the names of those brethren here. It's important for me to read, because you will see that John Wick is not a member of that committee. K.J. Stiphout from Holland, O. Velp from Germany, K.A. Eckeroth from Sweden, A. Rosenstein from Estonia, J. Adamsak from Germany, P. Rasmussen from Denmark, W. Richter from Germany, J. Rosenberg from Estonia, C. Spanknöbel from Switzerland, and D. Nikolic from Bulgaria. Did you notice that Johann Wick does not appear among these? This international committee decided to send 2 representatives to San Francisco, California, to the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And these 2 were Otto Velp and Heinrich Spanknöbel. These 2 men were sent to San Francisco, California, where the Seventh-day Adventist Church was going to have a delegation session. As soon as they arrived to San Francisco, they gave a letter to Elder H. Daniels that should be read to the delegation session. The letter was dated May 11, 1922. This letter was not answered. Those 2 brethren waited until May 18, and then they sent them a second letter. This second letter was not answered either. 4 days later, on May 22, they sent them a third letter, a very short one, requesting to answer yes or no to the previous 2 letters. And I wanted to show you that that international committee who sent these 2 are these brethren here, plus 1 brother who is not in this picture, which was Dimitri Nikolic. And this third letter was not answered either. On May 24, Elder Daniels answered verbally, saying that they cannot present this question to the delegates. So, our brethren had no success in going from Europe to the United States with such an important mission. The delegates of the General Conference at San Francisco were very busy. It is strange and hard to believe that they would not have time to listen to the representatives of thousands of souls in Europe. Yes, they were very busy in their session. What was the key point of their meeting? Let me quote from a secular newspaper that reports what was going on in their meetings. And this which I am going to quote is published in this book, Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement, the history of our church. And I read from the newspaper. Adventists in acid debate change leader. William A. Spicer, General Conference Secretary, named for presidency. After a fight that shook the World Conference of Seventh-day Adventists to its very foundations and threatened disruption in the ranks of its workers, a compromise on the 2 chief officers was effected yesterday, resulting in the unanimous adoption of the report of the nominating committee, naming William A. Spicer for the presidency and the demotion of former President Arthur J. Daniels to the office of the General Secretaryship, the office which Spicer has held for 20 years. The compromise was not reached, however, until after the voicing of much acid criticism and bitter denunciation of the dirty politics, which President Daniels and some of his supporters said had been going on for months in the campaign to bring about a change of presidents. This was published in San Francisco Chronicle, May 23, 1922. Now, they were very ashamed of what had happened, and after the election of the officers, they passed a resolution which was published in the conference bulletin. And this resolution is also published in this book. And they say, whereas there is unmistakable evidence that the baleful influence of political methods on the part of a comparatively small members has been at work to undermine the influence and destroy the good reputation of honored officials among us. Therefore, be it resolved that we do, under God, pledge ourselves to full repentance of all these unholy things. This was published in the conference bulletin. Now, Brethren Otto Velp and Heinrich Spanknöbel, the representative of the 2%, returned to Europe and reported to the International Committee the result of their visit. They could not have an interview with the delegates of the General Conference. In the end of that same year, 1922, the European Division of the Seventh-day Adventists held their council meeting from December 27, 1922 to January 2, 1923 at Gland, Switzerland. Among other points, they decided the following, and I will read, which is recorded also in this book, Seventh-day Adventist in Time of War, pages 346 and 347. And I read, we revere the law of God contained in the Decalogue, explained in the teachings of Christ and exemplified in his life. For that reason, we observe the seventh-day Sabbath, Saturday, as sacred time. We refrain from secular labor upon that day, but engage gladly in works of necessity and mercy for the relief of suffering and uplifting of humanity. In peace and in war, we decline to participate in acts of violence and bloodshed. We grant to each of our church members absolute liberty to serve his country at all times and in all places in accord with the dictates of his personal conscientious conviction. Seventh-day Adventists in Time of War, pages 346, 347. Now, this granting freedom of conscience to transgress God's law was repeated. That which happened in 1914 was now repeated or renewed in 1923. Now, when our brethren realized that the Seventh-day Adventist Church did not change her attitude concerning the transgression of God's law, but were granting to church members absolute liberty to serve his country at all times and in all places in accord with the dictates of his personal conscientious conviction, they decided to organize themselves as a denomination under the name of Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. The International Committee held a meeting in June 1, 1924, and in that meeting they realized that they could not work with greater efficiency without an organization of the Worldwide General Conference. On July 15, 1924, another meeting was held by the International Committee, and now they used already the title General Conference, even before it was organized. As at that time, the brethren were organized in different countries, in groups, churches, fields, and they were also able to organize 4 unions. The German Union, the Danubian Union, the Baltic Union, and the Scandinavian Union published together the readings for the week of prayer for the year 1924, already in the name of General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. The magazine was published in 1924. I have here a photocopy of the reading for the week of prayer in Hungarian language. It's very important to notice that even before the organization of the General Conference, the unions agreed with the name Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. That name, which was used by the German Union, International Missionary Society, was not accepted worldwide as the name of our church. In the year 1925, in July, from 14th to 20th of July, the first session of the General Conference was held. There were present 18 delegates, representing about 4,000 members. And here are the names of those delegates, and I will read them. Konstantin Ursan from Hungary, Wilhelm Richter from Germany, Dumitru Nikolic from Romania, Wilhelm Korpman from Estonia, Johann G. Hanselmann from Germany, Otto Welp from Germany, Peter Rasmussen from Denmark, Wilhelm Maas from Holland, Josef Adamczak from Germany, Albert Krahe from Germany, Mihai Streza from Romania, Karl Kossel from Germany, Heinrich Spanknöbel from Switzerland, Sister A. Otender from the Baltic Union, A. Jurgens from the Baltic Union, K. A. Ekeroth from Sweden, Max Köhler from Germany, and C. Adams from Germany. In this session, the officers of General Conference were elected, and also the principles of faith were adopted. And in the principles of faith, it states clearly our name, Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. And the first officers of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement were elected as they were: President Otto Welp, Secretary Wilhelm Maass. Treasurer, the same, Wilhelm Maass. And the committee, the presidents of the European Unions. Johann Wick and other fanatic elements had no part in the reform movement, neither before nor after the organization of the reform movement in 1925. Here I have a photocopy of the first minutes of the General Conference, and in the end you see a little stamp which reads General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. And these are the delegates that were present at that General Conference. Briefly, this is the true story or history of the beginning and establishment of Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement. Now, a very, very important question. Do we have a right to be the remnant church of God? If we do, what is it that gives us that right? The answer is given by the spirit of prophecy. And I will read from Review and Herald, July 17, 1900. Christ has a church in every age. Obedience to the commandments of God gives us a right to the privileges of this church. What is it that gives us a right to be the church of Christ, the remnant church? Obedience to the commandments of God. I want to read another statement from Manuscript Releases, Volume 14, page 102. It says, when a church proves unfaithful to the word of the Lord, whatever their position may be, however high and sacred their calling, the Lord can no longer work with them. Others are then chosen to bear important responsibilities. Manuscript Releases, Volume 14, page 102. Now, how does God consider a church that gives liberty for their members to transgress God's law? I want to read the answer also from the Spirit of Prophecy. This is recorded in Testimonies to Ministers, pages 16 and 17. Thus we acknowledge God and recognize His law, the foundation of His government in heaven and throughout His earthly dominions. His authority should be kept distinct and plain before the world, and no laws are to be acknowledged that come in collision with the laws of Jehovah. If, in defiance of God's arrangements, the world be allowed to influence our decisions or our actions, the purpose of God is defeated. However spacious the pretext, if the church waver here, there is written against her in the books of heaven a betrayal of the most sacred trusts and treachery to the kingdom of Christ. Testimonies to Ministers, pages 16 and 17. Dear brethren and friends, let us render willing obedience to the commandments of God at all times and in all places, as the result of being saved through Jesus Christ our Lord. Then we shall have the right to be God's remnant church. For further information about the history and beginning of and establishment of Reform movement, contact our headquarters. And we recommend also this book, The History of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform Movement, written by the late brother Alphonse Baubach. May God bless you all. Amen.